Welcome to Hope Stories, where sometimes a single ordinary moment can shatter a lifetime of silence. Imagine this: a man who built an empire of steel and glass, a man who thought nothing could touch him, suddenly brought to his knees by the smallest of gestures, a bottle of juice offered by a child on the side of a forgotten road. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? But what if that simple act held the power to unravel corruption, to ignite a movement, and to remind a hardened heart of the boy he once was? This isn't just about survival, it's about what happens when dignity collides with power, when innocence forces truth into the light. And at the heart of it all lies a choice that could change lives forever. And so, on a sweltering afternoon with the world rushing by, everything began with a single stop. The sun was merciless over Highway 216 in Texas, the kind of heat that turned chrome into a mirror and silence into pressure. Inside a white Rolls Royce, a man in a tailored Navy suit gripped the wheel too tightly. He hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. Meetings in Washington, promises from senators he didn't believe, documents with signatures he knew would never matter. He was a billionaire CEO, owner of over 40 companies, yet in that moment, all he wanted was ice-cold quiet. His head throbbed with numbers, forecasts, board votes, and a loneliness that money could never buffer. Then he saw it: a piece of wood stuck in the dirt, hand-painted in uneven black letters, fresh juice on dollar. He nearly laughed. On this forgotten stretch of highway, but something in the image ahead made him slow, then brake. There was a child, barefoot, no more than 9, standing by a makeshift stand built from broken planks. Behind him, an elderly woman sat in a wicker chair, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she had been waiting too long for something that would never come. 7 plastic bottles stood lined like treasure in the dust. The man stepped out, his shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. The boy walked forward with a bottle already in hand. "It's real cold, sir. Just $1." His voice didn't tremble, didn't beg. The man arched a brow. "$1?" He examined the bottle as though evaluating a failing stock. The boy didn't flinch. He simply extended it with both hands. The man took it. It was icy against his palm. One sip, orange, maybe mango too, burst with raw freshness. No chemicals, no polish, just fruit. And suddenly, silence fell inside him. He looked at the boy. "You're here alone?" The child tilted his head toward the old woman. "My grandma. My mom's in the hospital." The man crouched, his suit creasing for the first time in months. "Hospital? What's wrong with her?" The boy's eyes flickered. "Something in her blood. They need tests, but tests cost money." No plea, just fact. The CEO swallowed hard. "How many bottles you sell a day?" "If a car stops, maybe 3. Some days, none." The man turned, opened the car door, pulled a bill, 1 crisp 100. He extended it. The boy looked back at his grandmother. She gave a small nod. He accepted the money, then reached into a battered box and returned with 2 coins. "Your change." The man hesitated. "Keep it." But the boy insisted, pushing the coins into his palm. "Not fair. You only took 1 bottle." The billionaire froze. He was not used to refusals, least of all from children. The sight of that boy standing firm in the heat with dignity instead of desperation cracked something inside him. He remembered himself at that age, hawking bread by the roadside while his own mother collapsed from exhaustion. No one had ever stopped for them. No one. He had built empires on the steel of that memory, and in the process had buried it. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "David. I'll be 9 next month." "And your mom?" "Maria Lopez. She's in the county hospital, Red Wing." The man straightened, scanning the emptiness around them. Dust, heat, silence. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Every day." He nodded once, returned to his car, but didn't start the engine immediately. In the rearview mirror, he saw David still standing there, bottle in hand, the sun beating down on his bare head. Something twisted in his chest. He dialed his assistant. "Get me the names of every child in Red Wing County Hospital with suspected blood disorders. Find out what it takes to cover donations. I don't care how. Now." "Sir, are you all right?" Her voice came cautious. "No," he said, eyes fixed on the boy shrinking in the distance. "But I will be." The next morning before 8 a.m., he was back on that same stretch of road, alone. The sign still swung in the breeze. But the stand was empty. No boy, no bottles, no woman. Only a scrap of notebook paper pinned by a stone. "Went to hospital. Mom got worse." He read it twice, folded it with unusual care, slid it into his pocket. Then he pressed the accelerator faster than reason toward Red Wing. The hospital was a shell of peeling paint and mold, crowded with waiting bodies. He pushed past reception until he found her. Maria Lopez, 32, sedated, pale, suspected advanced leukemia. David sat in the hallway, clutching a crushed plastic bottle, his eyes hollow but unbroken. The billionaire knelt before him. "Do you remember me?" The boy nodded. "I told you I'd come back, and I'm not leaving." Within an hour, an ambulance from St. Hope Medical Center arrived, summoned by his signature and his money. David gripped his mother's hand as she was lifted inside, his grandmother trembling in the corner. "She's going to get help," the man promised, but even as he spoke, he knew the story was bigger, darker. Already his phone vibrated. A blocked number. A woman's voice, calm, almost polite. "We know what you're doing. It will cost you dearly." He froze, phone still to his ear, eyes on David's small shoulders. It wasn't random, it was a warning. And as the sirens wailed and the ambulance disappeared down the road, he realized the truth. What had started with one sip of juice was about to drag him into a war that reached far beyond one boy, one mother, one stand on the side of a forgotten highway. What would you have done in his place? Drive past the boy or stop and change everything? Do you believe one simple choice can ignite a battle against an entire corrupt system? And as the billionaire clenched that crumpled note in his fist, he knew the price of a single dollar was about to become higher than anything he had ever paid. The county hospital smelled of bleach and fear, its walls blistered with peeling paint, its hallways crowded with families clutching hope like rationed bread. The billionaire walked through as though trespassing in a world he had once escaped. He had built towers in Manhattan, commanded boardrooms in glass skyscrapers, yet here, where the ceiling fans barely stirred the heavy air, he felt like a boy again, standing helpless while his own mother lay on a cracked mattress, waiting for care that never came. That memory pressed on him like a weight he thought he had buried. He reached the red ward. Maria Lopez lay unconscious, her skin pale, her lips parted as though every breath was borrowed. Machines wheezed around her, tubes snaked into her arms. David sat on the floor against the wall, hugging his knees, watching with eyes too old for his small face. The grandmother, fragile as paper, whispered prayers under her breath. The billionaire crouched beside the boy. "She's being treated," he said, forcing calm. David looked at him, unblinking. "Are you sure? They don't tell us anything. They just say wait." His voice cracked, but he did not cry. The billionaire felt the words claw inside him. Wait, the same word he had heard years ago when no one came. He rose, stormed into the attending physician's office. "What does she need? Say it directly." The young doctor, weary-eyed, explained with clinical honesty, "A series of tests unavailable here. Genetic panels, a bone marrow biopsy, all urgent, all expensive. If we rely on state transfer, it could take weeks. She doesn't have weeks." The billionaire asked how much. The doctor named a figure north of $200,000. He didn't blink. He signed. Within the hour, he arranged for a private ambulance to transfer her to St. Hope Medical Center, one of the best in the region. Yet as the gurney rolled out, his phone buzzed again. A blocked number. He answered. This time the voice was colder, masculine. "Turn back. She's not worth what you're risking." Then the line went dead. For a moment he stood frozen in the parking lot, the phone heavy in his hand. He knew threats. He had made some in his ruthless ascent. He had received others from rivals in hostile takeovers. But this was different. This wasn't about money or market share. This was about silencing a woman who had seen something buried under contracts and secrets. He felt the old ruthlessness stir in his veins, the instinct to fight back. Yet as he looked at David climbing into the ambulance beside his mother, he felt a tug he hadn't allowed in years. Conscience. That night at St. Hope, Maria was admitted into the oncology ward. David refused to sleep, keeping vigil beside her glass-walled room, clutching the same empty bottle he had held on the roadside. The billionaire watched from a chair, his tie loosened, his mind torn. He had power to fund her treatment, to shield this family from immediate ruin. But power came with exposure, and exposure meant risk. He could walk away, no one would blame him. Or he could stand firm, knowing he was now inside a storm engineered by men who wielded influence sharper than blades. When the attending hematologist confirmed the diagnosis, acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive rare, his chest hollowed. She needed treatment now, but her body was frail. The doctors debated, begin chemotherapy immediately and risk collapse, or stabilize first and gamble with time. They turned to him for a decision, as though his money gave him authority over life itself. His throat tightened. For once, the weight of choice felt heavier than any merger. He thought of his mother. He thought of how no one had stopped for her. Stabilize her, he said finally. Give her a chance to fight. His voice cracked with something between command and prayer. Later, in the quiet lounge outside the ward, David approached him. Why are you helping us? The billionaire looked at the boy's eyes, unwavering despite exhaustion. Because once, no one helped me. David tilted his head, then asked, Does that make you angry? The question pierced him. Anger had fueled every empire he built, every ruthless deal. But in this boy's presence, anger felt like ash. It makes me want to make sure you don't grow up like I did, he admitted. For the first time in decades, the words felt like truth. But before dawn, another blow arrived. His attorney, who had begun digging at his request, called with a discovery. Maria had once filed a police report against a local contractor, accusing him of abusing a young girl. She had later withdrawn the complaint after receiving threats. That contractor now held state contracts worth millions. His political patron was none other than Marconi Steele, the Secretary of Economic Development, and an old ally of the billionaire himself. The connection hit like ice water. The threats weren't random. They were warnings to stay silent. To save Maria was to expose a network of power he had once benefited from. He hung up the phone, his reflection in the glass wall showing a man split in two. The titan who had thrived on silence, and the human being who could no longer ignore a child selling juice in the sun. The choice before him was no longer about money. It was about memory, morality, and the cost of redemption. Would you risk everything you built to protect one woman and her child, knowing it could unravel your entire empire? And as the billionaire stood in that corridor, torn between his past alliances and the boy who reminded him of everything he'd forgotten, the sound of footsteps behind him signaled that his decision was about to be forced. The footsteps echoed in the sterile corridor until a man in a tailored gray suit emerged from the shadows. He wasn't hospital staff. He carried no clipboard, wore no badge. Yet he walked with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. The billionaire recognized the look instantly. It was the look of power dressed in plausible deniability. The stranger stopped a few feet away, hands clasped neatly, his voice low and courteous. Mr. Harrington, you've done a noble thing, but noble doesn't always mean wise. The words were poison dipped in honey. The billionaire's jaw tightened. Who sent you? The man gave a small, almost pitying smile. Let's just say I represent interests you once benefited from, interests that don't appreciate your sudden change of heart. The billionaire felt the room tilt, not because of fear, but because every syllable was true. For years, he had thrived within the same system that now threatened this woman and her son. He wasn't their savior. He was part of the machinery that had nearly destroyed them. The realization cut deeper than the threat itself. Behind the glass, David stirred awake, pressing his small hand to the window where his mother lay sedated, the billionaire's throat constricted. The boy's innocence had already collided with corruption once, selling juice by the roadside to keep his mother alive. And now, by standing beside him, the billionaire risked dragging him into the crosshairs of men like Steele and their networks. The suited messenger leaned closer. Sign a withdrawal of support, quietly. Fund her treatment off the record if you must. But don't dig, don't speak, don't stir ghosts. Otherwise, the ghosts will come for you. The billionaire should have dismissed him, should have called security. But instead, his silence betrayed the war raging inside. Could he justify dismantling the life he had built, an empire, thousands of jobs, global influence, just to protect one family? Was it redemption or selfish atonement? If he pressed forward, everything he owned could be weaponized against him. If he retreated, he would condemn Maria Lopez and countless others to the silence he himself had endured as a child. His memory betrayed him again. His mother collapsing on a cold kitchen floor, his young self screaming for help that never came. the neighbors closing their doors because her illness wasn't their problem. That boy had sworn to climb high enough that no one could ever shut a door in his face again. And he had. But in the process, he had become one of those very neighbors. Blind behind his gates, David's eyes, the same desperate resilience he once carried, burned like a mirror. He realized then this wasn't about saving Maria. It was about saving himself from the man he had become. He turned to the messenger, voice low, steel threaded through weariness. "Tell your employers I'm not withdrawing. Not quietly. Not at all." The man's smile vanished. "Then understand this. She is not just a patient. She is a liability, and liabilities get erased." He stepped back into the shadows, leaving only the faint echo of polished shoes on linoleum. Later that night, the billionaire sat in the hospital chapel, a room of flickering candles and wooden pews scarred by decades of prayers. He hadn't prayed in years, yet the silence pressed him to confess, not to God but to himself. He whispered into the stillness, "If I keep going, I may lose everything. If I stop, I lose myself." His reflection in the stained glass looked foreign, fractured in colors of guilt and resolve. When he returned to the ward, David was asleep on a chair, his grandmother knitting beside him despite trembling hands. Maria's monitors beeped steady, fragile music of borrowed time. The billionaire placed his palm against the glass. For the first time, he felt the full weight of choice. He could no longer hide behind money. He had to decide what kind of man he would be when the system turned its knives against him. And in that stillness, a truth settled inside him like a blade sliding home. Sometimes survival isn't victory. Sometimes the only victory is refusal to be silent, no matter the cost. If you were in his place, would you protect your empire of power or risk it all to defend one fragile truth? And as the billionaire stood watching the woman whose fate could ignite a war, a sudden alarm split the night air. Her heart monitor shrieked, and everything he thought he had decided was thrown into chaos. The piercing alarm shattered the brittle calm of the ward. Nurses rushed in, the red glow of the monitor pulsing like a heartbeat gone mad. Maria Lopez's body convulsed under the strain, her fragile frame jerking as if caught between two worlds. David woke instantly, leaping from his chair with a cry that seemed too old for his small body, while his grandmother clutched the wooden cross around her neck, whispering frantic prayers. The billionaire stood frozen for a beat too long, watching the chaos through the glass, his own pulse racing with the merciless rhythm of the alarm. He forced himself forward, pushing past the curtain, ignoring the protests of a nurse who tried to block him. He had no medical training, nothing to offer, but he couldn't stand outside any longer. The lead physician barked orders, syringes flashed, hands pressed against Maria's chest. Time collapsed into staccato bursts of motion, compressions, injections, the metallic clatter of instruments. And through it all, David's voice cut like a blade. "Don't let her die. Please don't let her die." The billionaire's throat burned. He remembered being that boy, helpless, begging, unheard. The monitor flatlined. The sound was a dagger. He gripped the railing, his nails biting into steel. This was the moment when everything unraveled, when the one fragile thread holding them all together snapped. But then, impossibly, the monitor jumped, a weak spike, then another. A faltering rhythm fought its way back, stubborn as the child who refused to give up selling juice by the roadside. Relief swept the room in a wave, but it was fragile, dangerous relief. Maria had been pulled back from the edge, yet the doctor's face carried no victory. "She bought herself time," he said quietly, "but it's time we can lose at any second." Outside, in the silence that followed, David slumped against the billionaire's chest, sobbing until exhaustion silenced him. The man held the boy awkwardly at first, then with a tenderness he didn't recognize in himself. He felt the boy's heartbeat against his ribs, fragile but real, and realized with horrifying clarity that if Maria slipped away, this child would become a mirror of his own abandoned past. Could he live with that? Could he stand by and watch history repeat itself because he was too afraid to burn the bridges of his empire? In the early dawn, as the machines hummed and Maria clung to life by wires and will, the billionaire walked out to the hospital's empty parking lot. The air was cold, the kind that bites into bone and refuses to let go. He dialed his attorney. "I want the foundation papers expedited, not in weeks, today." Ricardo hesitated. Do you understand what this means? Once your name is tied to her, once you go public, they won't just come after you. They'll come after everything you've built. He closed his eyes, the image of Maria's body convulsing burning behind them. Then let them come, because if I stay silent, I'm no different than the men who profit off her silence. That night, while Maria lay unconscious, the billionaire sat with David at the vending machine, the boy's small legs swinging off the edge of the chair. David looked up, his face streaked with dried tears. Is my mom going to be okay? The man swallowed hard. He wanted to promise, to lie if necessary, but the boy deserved truth, not illusions. She's fighting, he said slowly, and sometimes fighting is the bravest thing a person can do. David nodded as though the answer, however incomplete, was enough. Then he pulled a crumpled drawing from his pocket, a sketch of a stand with bright letters, bottles lined neatly in a row. When she wakes up, I'm going to build a real juice place, bigger than before, with her name on it. The billionaire stared at the childish lines, and for the first time in years, tears slid unchecked down his face. But as he folded the paper back into David's hand, a shadow fell across the hallway. A hospital guard rushed in with a note hastily scribbled, slipped under the main entrance door minutes earlier. It carried no signature, only 4 words in jagged script. This is your last warning. The billionaire felt the chill settle in his bones. They weren't bluffing. Maria's fight for life had just collided with a darker war, one that would demand more than money or influence. It would demand the truth and the courage to survive what came with it. What would you risk if you knew saving one life meant declaring war on an entire system of corruption? And as the billionaire crumpled the warning in his fist, headlights flared in the distance, 2 black SUVs idling at the edge of the lot, engines running, waiting for him. The SUVs idled like predators in the distance, their headlights slicing the dark as breath from their exhaust curled into the cold air. The billionaire stood rooted, the crumpled note digging into his palm, pulse hammering as if his body was warning him not to move. For a moment, he wondered if this was the line, the moment when stepping further meant he would never step back. Then he thought of David's drawing, the uneven lines spelling out hope, and of Maria's fragile heartbeat fighting through machines. He took 1 step forward. The SUV's engines roared in response, revving like a threat. A security guard rushed to his side, whispering urgently, "Sir, you need to come back inside." But he didn't move. He wanted whoever sat in those vehicles to see him, unflinching, as if he could will his fear into defiance. After a long, tense minute, the SUVs peeled away, vanishing into the night, leaving behind the bitter taste of a promise unspoken. They would be back. Inside, Ricardo was waiting with documents spread across a plastic hospital table. They're escalating. You have to decide now. Either you keep this quiet and protect yourself, or you go public and burn every bridge you've built. The billionaire stared at the stack of papers, contracts that had built empires but also silenced voices like Maria's. "If I go public, people will die," he said softly. Ricardo leaned in. "If you stay silent, people will die too. The question is, whose death are you willing to live with?" The words hit like a slap. He felt the weight of his own hypocrisy pressing down. For years he had chosen silence when silence was profitable. But now, standing in the sterile corridors of a crumbling hospital, he couldn't stomach it anymore. He signed the papers with a hand that trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that with every stroke of ink, he was setting fire to the world he once ruled. At dawn, he returned to Maria's room. She was awake, pale but conscious, her eyes flickering open to find her son curled at her side, asleep with his hand clutching hers. The billionaire stood at the doorway, afraid to intrude on a tenderness he hadn't earned. But Maria's voice, hoarse and thin, broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" He stepped closer, unable to dodge the truth. "Because I used to be him," he said, nodding toward David. "I used to sell bread on the roadside with my mother, and no one stopped, no one cared. And I promised myself I'd never be that powerless again. But somewhere along the way, I became the man who doesn't stop either. Until I saw him." Maria studied his face, searching for the hidden cost. "They won't forgive you. Men like you don't just walk away from their world." He swallowed. "Then let them come for me. Just not for you, not for him." For the first time, Maria's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, though it was laced with exhaustion. Then you'd better be ready to fight a war you can't win. Hours later, news broke. A leaked article appeared online. Grainy photos of the billionaire standing in the hospital parking lot, his name tied to whispers of corruption, exploitation, and now, allegedly, using Maria's tragedy as political theater. The headline read, "The Savior or the Schemer?" Billionaire's sudden crusade raises questions. The billionaire watched the story spread like wildfire across social media, his phone vibrating endlessly with messages from old allies cutting ties. He expected anger. What he didn't expect was the flood of messages from strangers, single mothers, factory workers, students, sharing their own stories of silence and fear. "She's not alone anymore," one message read. For the first time, the noise didn't feel like condemnation. It felt like an army waking up. But with that awakening came risk. That evening, the hospital lost power. Generators kicked in, lights flickered, machines groaned. For 5 harrowing minutes, Maria's monitors beeped unevenly. Doctors rushed, nurses cursed, and David clung to his mother's arm, sobbing. The billionaire stood in the shadows, watching the fragility of life measured by a red line on a screen. He felt a cold certainty settle over him. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to remind him just how easy it would be to snuff out everything. As power stabilized, he pulled Ricardo aside, voice low and hard. "Find out who controls the grid. Every subcontractor, every middleman. Someone pulled this." Ricardo nodded grimly. "And when we find them?" The billionaire's jaw clenched. "Then they'll learn the cost of silence." Do you believe his choice to confront the system head-on is bravery or recklessness, knowing it puts everyone he cares about in danger? And as the fluorescent lights hummed back to life, a nurse slipped a sealed envelope into his hand. Inside was a single photo of David, taken from outside the hospital window. Proof the boy was already being watched. The photo of David, captured through a hospital window, burned in his hand like a warning carved into flesh. For nights he could not sleep, hearing every creak in the corridor, every rattle of the ventilators as a phantom footstep drawing closer. Yet in that sleeplessness, something hardened inside him. Fear would not be the final chapter. The investigation moved faster than anyone anticipated. With contracts exposed, names named, and evidence stacked higher than his empire's towers, indictments fell like dominoes. Secretaries, businessmen, deputies, the very people he once dined with were paraded before cameras in handcuffs. But power does not vanish quietly. Each arrest triggered new threats, each headline twisted by those who still clung to the rot. And through it all, Maria fought. Her body was bruised by the storms of chemotherapy, but her spirit, though fragile, bent toward life. David was her anchor, sitting for hours by the glass when isolation rules kept him apart, pressing hand-drawn notes against the barrier. "Keep fighting, Mom. The world is waiting." The billionaire, once spectator, now lived in the hospital more than his own mansion, pacing the corridors like a man exiled from his former kingdom. One evening, weeks later, Maria stood on trembling legs, aided by nurses, her hair gone, her body diminished, but her eyes fierce with the miracle of survival. She walked 3 steps toward the boy who had refused to break. The billionaire watched from the doorway, and when David whispered, "You're really here?" Maria wept, not from weakness, but from the unbearable truth that she had been meant to disappear, and instead had become living proof that silence could be defeated. That night, news broke of a final attempt on his life. His car, parked outside, rigged with explosives, discovered minutes before ignition. Police swarmed. Ricardo begged him to retreat into hiding, but the billionaire refused. "If I hide, they've already won." The following morning, as dawn spread gold over the hospital, he called a press conference on the steps. Journalists thronged, security tensed, but he stood bareheaded, his voice steady. "This began with a $3 bottle of juice. A boy offered me what little he had, and it reminded me of what I had lost. Today I stand not as a businessman, not as a savior, but as a man who finally stopped long enough to listen. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Silence feeds corruption, but voices, even trembling ones, can move nations." The crowd erupted, not in applause alone, but in chants of Maria's name, David's name, turning 2 forgotten lives into a chorus too loud to bury. The months that followed reshaped everything. The foundation grew beyond his control, spreading across states, feeding, sheltering, and protecting those who had been invisible. He passed the reins to Marina and Ricardo, choosing instead to remain close to Maria and David, who had become family in all but blood. Yet he knew history is rarely merciful, and one late night, long after the corridors emptied, Maria called him to her room. She was smiling faintly, but her skin was pale again, her body weaker than before. "They say remission," she whispered, "but you and I know some battles aren't won by medicine alone." He wanted to deny it, to order more doctors, more tests, more money thrown at the abyss, but she shook her head. "Don't waste your empire trying to hold back the tide. Use it to carry David forward." He bowed his head, grief pressing like stone, but in her gaze he saw peace. Weeks later, Maria slipped away quietly in her sleep, her son's hand clasped in hers. The hospital bells rang not to mark victory, but to honor her passage. Crowds gathered outside, candles flickering like fragile stars, voices singing softly. David stood at the kiosk he had rebuilt, his face streaked with tears yet unbroken, handing out bottles with labels that now read, "Suco de Vida, life's drink." When asked why, he answered, "Because she taught me that even endings can taste like beginnings." The billionaire sat apart, a single bottle in his hand, staring at the liquid glowing in the sunlight. For the first time in decades, he let tears fall freely, not from defeat, but from recognition. Maria had not been erased. She had become eternal, her story braided into thousands of others. He lifted the bottle to the sky and whispered, "This is your legacy." And as David laughed through his grief, pouring juice for strangers who became kin, the billionaire understood the boy had never been the one saved. It was he who had been rescued by a child's refusal to stop believing. In time, the foundation's reach grew beyond borders, carried on by voices that refused to be silenced. And whenever people asked the billionaire why he risked everything, he would answer the same. Because one day, on a lonely road, I finally stopped the car. What did this story mean to you, and how did it touch your heart? If you like this story, comment 100 below. Which country are you watching from? Share this story with your friends. And thank you for watching Hope Stories.